podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you can please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. Peace. I'm Majestic.
My brother, Justice Rajee.
So, here we are today, and an occurrence occurred this week, or last week, or this week. But Kendrick Lamar released a new album, and I think we mentioned it in our last conversation that we would circle back to it. And I thought it was I think I've stated I enjoy Kendrick Lamar's music, and I appreciate his approach. I appreciate the way he goes about his creativity, especially in his generation, where I think the external media vehicles, I don't think, are into some of this. Like, there's things that to me harken to kind of our time or our youth. In making music and hip hop, and like where hip hop was in the mid 90s, and I don't think some of those things are praised in the same way, like the concept of like a full album and where it fits. I feel like the measuring stick is something different, and he somehow seems to sort of thread though a little bit of that. So I know you had some real specific thoughts about the record, so I wanted to add on about it a little bit.
Yeah, well, the first thing, and thank you for that intro. As always, you actually got me thinking about something you just made a point about there, which is like how delivery of music is taken differently, right? And it's like, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but what happens when you get to like end stage capitalism, or close to end stage, or close to the, whatever the terminology you may use for it, where you think about like people just want delivery of a thing totally divorced from everything else. Mm-hmm. So you think about the record age, and you're like, okay, I put a record on earlier, and I was like, wow, these like songs kind of sound like each other, but kind of don't. But implicitly, you're going to like kind of listen to all of it. And then you'll flip it over and kind of listen to it, right? Like you'll take all of a project in, right? And then when you get the cassette, which just allows you to like take it with you and process it. And then all the technological stuff that comes with the advent of a cassette. And I think one of the biggest things is the taping of block parties or parties, taping of battles from a hip hop context. Mm-hmm. And then also making your own pause tape, right? Which I think is like one of the things like, oh man, yeah, we listen to Lady B, right? For everybody in Delaware Valley, like, oh, we're listening to this, and then like record stuff we only heard when it was played on the radio, and we don't know when next time it's going to get played on the radio. Right. So like this idea of scarcity, and then the technological way to deal with the scarcity challenge, mm-hmm. which gets you the mixtape, right? And it also gets you the blend tape. It gets you that very New York thing of, we're going to play an instrumental from an R&B singer and then put it over a hip hop song, or vice versa, which for those who don't know, kind of gave birth to what you know with the Uptown Records, Andre Harrell, Puffy sound, right? Which I put Andre Harrell first, because I think it's important to always put him first. Yeah. But sometimes we putting Puffy first, and it's like, no, Andre Harrell is the source of all that champagne and bubbles. So anyway, so then we go through the CD, and now we get to the streaming era, and we've gotten to a point where it's like, here's the thing: you don't actually own the thing, right? You rent the thing in perpetuity as long as you got $10 or $12.
Yeah.
But for $12 a month, you rent all the things as much as you want, but you don't actually like own the thing. But it broke down to the place of, yeah, you're not trying to hear this concept album unless you're Taylor Swift or somebody, right? And I think Kendrick has put himself in that kind of place where, things have a relationship. Like an album isn't your 10 best songs.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, in an odd way, I think Illmatic was the first kind of departure in that kind of context, where Illmatic felt like the best 9 or 10 songs Nas had. They just happened to be an amazing set of 9 or 10 songs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't like connected. You remember even when it dropped, it wasn't like a theme to it. It wasn't like EPMD and Hit Squad and like
Yeah.
Try,
Yeah. Hey,
you know?
I think it. I mean, I do think it had a. I mean, listening to it on tape, it did have a flow of sorts, but it wasn't necessarily like thematically organized. Like it wasn't like you went through a progression that appeared at least to be intentional to like get you to the last song. It just got to the last song.
And I concur. And I know, and I agree with
Then
you.
you tape.
You're right.
You had the two-way tape Walkman. You tape the flip, and then you just start over. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But it didn't necessarily. It wasn't like, oh, now I've reached the end of the story he's telling. It's like, oh, this was a good one. This was a good one. I like that one too. But it wasn't.
Yeah, and maybe there. I mean, and I think that was a unique album that it was kind of like 9 or 10 small stories, right? Like
Yeah.
in its own way.
Yeah.
So anyway, getting to this time with this project, I think the two things I want to share, and then I'd love to get your take on it. Is I think he and his team have been able to subvert the hip hop model. They've been able to say, you know what, we drop when we want to. We make enough money from other stuff that we kind of drop when we want to. Like they have a Cash App commercial. They have a thing with Dior, right? Like they do enough stuff on the creative side that then they get to take their options, right? I mean, I think you also see it with Tyler, right? Like Chromacopia, that's some crazy shit, man. But it's like, but it again, at the same time, he's creative. He drops when he wants to, kind of drops how he wants to. He gave a week in advance, but Kendrick didn't give no in advance. Here's a video and here's the album.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it sets a precedent for how you can function if you choose to for music that is not single based, because hip hop has, generally speaking, gone to being single based, except for a couple artists. Right.
Right.
So that's like one. Another piece that really jumped out to me was this unabashed celebration of Blackness from a particular angle of West Coast culture, of like LA/California, because I do think it's kind of reductive just to say that it's LA culture, because it's not, right? There's definitely music on it that sounds like Bay Area music.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely songs that sounds like Mac Dre, right? The Peekaboo song sounds like Keek the Sneak. For folks who know, that's a Oakland artist who was kind of really big during the early 2000s. I'm still trying to figure out this aughts thing, but maybe you can break it down for me later. We call it 00 zone, but that's aughts shit. But like so it's a it's an unabashed Northern California kind of sound. And Not Like Us gave an inclination to it, and they came out with an album that was like a full representation of that sound. Which the unique thing about it, again, as hip hop is going to this like late stage capitalism, everything sounds like it's from everywhere. So albums have like the trap sound. Some albums have a drill sound. Some albums have this artist singing. Albums have that, right? And again, something that started in the 90s where you had to have a somewhat formulaic thing. The formula got almost done to perfection / overkill, where I feel like this, Mr. Morale was also like this, but this album in particular is like a full refutation of that. Yes, there are singles on there. There are things that get in the zeitgeist, but it is a full West Coast album full of West Coast slang, full of West Coast energy, full of coming off the Juneteenth event. Like it is literally for and about an area. And in that, I think has a universal quality, which is a tension in hip hop that I think is there that we tried to over resolve. Like I didn't know what it meant to be from Compton with listening to Straight Outta Compton or any of the early NWA stuff. But it didn't matter because it was just quality music that told a story of blackness from their understanding.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have to be from New York to appreciate Illmatic. You didn't have to be from Long Island to appreciate De La, right? Like it was just it was a quality of music. You had to be from Houston to understand the Ghetto Boys. So I think it's like an album that returns fully back to I am not creating a sound so that everyone can get it. Everyone is coming to accept and appreciate the sound and the reflection of West Coast culture today. And again, not nostalgia, which we often fall into in hip hop, right? Not nostalgia, but actually the like current West Coast culture and celebrating it. And so I think it's very unique. And I'm not even going into the whole Drake thing. Just because there's just so much there. And I also one more piece about this. He's open with being angry. Like he's not a happy camper on this project. And he's openly and unabashedly not being a happy camper. And I think that's very unique because again, we think about how can someone be marketable, and the album has taken hits and Pitchfork and others because it's like he's rhyming through his teeth. But I think that is a actual ode to Pac in the seething energy, frankly, and we could talk about this later, but of like the relationship to like Machiavelli, that album in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
All right. So I think a couple things. One, I did want to argue. I do feel, and I've seen a couple people I know that or grew up somewhere on the West Coast, at least one or two comment. Yeah, like this seems like something that is speaking to how we feel, like how we listen to music, like kind of are like a cross section of sound wise. Even the and I don't, I'm not in the know of all of the whatever various artists out there, but it seemed like also very like folks from either I think like say sound wise that are either maybe from LA or from the West Coast. In terms of some of the features, some of the folks that are on the songs with him. The tone though is very like it's almost like it's like I'm not trying to make this necessarily accessible to you if this way of doing music is it for you like something you kind of like I'm not really trying to make an accessible record, you know what I'm saying, or album in the context of like oh this sounds like whatever the other most recently popular hip hop, album was
Right.
labeled
Right.
that was labeled hip hop. This does not sound like it doesn't sound like my last record. You know what I mean? Or my last two or three records. It's less jazzy. It is especially that, like I said, I characterize the last record as a dude who said I would make a record about me going through therapy and figuring some stuff out about myself as I'm becoming a more grown man. A record before that won a Pulitzer Prize, that had a lot of like, it yes, it had some, they say bops, but it also had a lot of, it had several songs that were like, I'm talking about some grim challenging stuff, and then, closing, but in this record being, I'm coming off this year that has been framed by my open animus for a very popular artist. And one, I'm not necessarily over that. I still don't like this man, but also it's like I'm speaking into like a kind of these other parts of my own authenticity, so to speak, almost, right? It's like almost you had this conversation about how this dude ain't really, this person is not like us. And to a degree, maybe if you thought like as him as an artist, as Kendrick Lamar was like, maybe like he's from Compton, but he's like different. And he's like, nah, man, I'm from Compton. But we try to make me like I'm from somewhere else.
God, can I just add on really quick to that? Because I
Yeah.
think that's a good point. I think, I sent you when we, saw where Killer Mike was like, a piece when he was on, what's that dude to be dressing funny show? Cam Newton.
Mm-hmm.
He was on his show and he's like, they try to make me different because I'm an activist or because I do this kind of hip hop that, but no, my heroes and my villains all look the same and all from the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm complex. And I think Kendrick Lamar is willing to make us grapple with his complexities in ways that we don't like to do with music artists today.
Yeah.
We would rather than just be villains or all good people to sell music.
Yeah. And
Let me just take your point.
Yeah, and I think a great deal of us would, especially music with words, I guess, like we want it to just be like for fun. Right. And if anyone listening doesn't know, I'm not an advocate of that. Like, I think artists should make the music that they tell the story they feel like they need to tell. And if some of it is fun, that's cool. But some of it is like, man, that's pretty challenging, or
right.
puts you in a how you say crossways, in that you might have an energy that makes you want to want to get up and dance, but what you're talking about is like, oh, that's, I don't know. What I mean? Like, keep it light, brother. You know what I'm saying? We just want to go have a good time. You know what I mean? I saw I don't know if it was recent, but I guess maybe it was with Talib Kweli, I think on the Breakfast Show, Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
Saying that, like, referencing the argument in the movie The Photograph.
Yeah.
Which would let enjoyable movie, but I had forgot that piece was in there. But then I was like, oh yeah, when I saw the clip, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Like this. And it's an encapsulation in a sense, like something I would say harkens even back to the conflict or the whatever, or the turning conflict of hip hop's sort of full ascension in heading to being, at the center of pop culture in terms of general like pop music. That in our age, where the tension between, were you a conscious rapper, or were you a gangster rapper, or were you a whatever kind of rap, like all these kinds of rappers people wanted to make you, as opposed to, and that there was a um you make all them songs, reference Nas again, you know what I'm saying? Black Girl Lost, here you go with that off the wall, back to Africa shit again. You know what I'm saying?
That guy body shit.
Yeah, that guy body shit. I am gonna go, I'm trying to go kick it. Like, I don't hear all this pressed ass about your ex. I guess to make another reference, I always hear about your guts and glory. You know what I'm saying? Like, the Jay-Z reference there. You know what I'm saying? But it's and it's something that hasn't totally left the music. And in this age, I don't know the artists on the like mainstream level, like, and I think maybe we're better that have crossed to the pop appeal level, who, of them, Kendrick would be considered the most, who at some point brings up something uncomfortable on a record, as opposed to like that isn't related to like, yeah, girl, I should have never left you. Like, kind of uncomfortable, like your man's from Canada talk about, he made the whole song basically drunk dialing somebody used to be in a relationship late, talk about, break up with that dude. You know what I'm saying? I still like you. Like, get out. Right. You know what I mean? Like, these are sort of the dynamics. of the moment. The something that I also came across in my lessons is the way. So in the absence of a like a group or an artist who we would consider in this time like just overtly, you know, socially political consciousness is like the core of what they're making music about. Like that is a animal on the I think on the wild on the main the largest stage of exposure for music that has gone extinct. And I just don't think that anyone that has, people may dabble in that space. Some of those artists may show up on other people's things, but I don't feel like, there was a time when like Public Enemy could have been seen as like one of the most known hip hop acts in the world, right? And they was being Public Enemy. And that's not the case. Like and then that might be again only in my mind because maybe there was a whole bunch of people from the '80s that are like, oh yeah, I heard of that group. That's the one with Flavor Flav, right? Flavor of Love. He's from that group, but they don't know none of their songs. So
Right.
I might be in my bubble even bringing that up, but that would to me would be the closest to like someone who's overtly politically, socially conscious music, and you might want to get up and dance to it or something. And so now, what he's doing in the way again is why I said like I appreciate what he does, and this is not to say that he's never made a misstep in his characterization of things in the world, but I think he's done those things from trying to be honest about what he thought or saw or how he saw those things. You know what I mean? I don't think he was putting on a front. You know what I mean? Like I don't think he was doing it. You know what I mean? For and so I appreciate it. I think that I would say uh, it's nice to hear, and if anyone has other records, folks should because I guess there's a part of it's going like, yeah, but there's somebody that's like, but you haven't listened to some dude record this year, and then I'm like, all right, my bad, like I didn't, but I think at the moment, and then him sort of capturing this space before, right before like a holiday weekend when people hang out and talk about stuff.
Yeah, and
It's
that's my
super
point
smart.
about like them being very thoughtful. Like drop it so everyone talks about it during Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Like let's be real. Like you're dropping it and it gets just clear open space. Like there's nothing else happening in the music. Like again, Tyler dropped a couple weeks ago, but Tyler, as big as he is his own kind of niche market.
Mhm.
Um, it sells a lot of records. So I don't want to say niche and frame it like that. I think more niche, just in the sense of the broader sense of not just sales but consumption. And I make the distinction between where sales are at and consumption,
Mhm.
because I think you can sell a lot of records and not be in the zeitgeist of pop consumption.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think people like Kendrick Lamar sell a lot of records and they are in the zeitgeist of consumption, right? Like people are like, oh, let me break down what this means because you were in a battle with Drake and then he sues the machine, right? Like, so now we have a conversation about the machine. But I think in that you're then talking a lot about that versus talking about what does it mean for someone to express pure appreciation for unabashed kind of like blackness on one level, and he's doing that visually.
Mhm.
And then musically, the again, like I harken back to if you listen to it, it's kind of like that Machiavelli sound where it was released, it was raw. There was a through line to Machiavelli, but it probably was Pac's anger, right? Because Machiavelli was an album that gave you Hail Mary, just like Whacked Out Murals,
Mhm.
and then it gave you White Man's World, right? Like it gave you love songs, it gave you We're Happy to Be from this area songs, right? Like Machiavelli was actually a much more complex project in retrospect, and I liked it when I heard it, but did not probably appreciate how complex it was until much later.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That Pac as an artist had brought in 4 or 5 different elements that you were listening to in one project, which again, we were used to hearing at a certain time. So it wasn't that amazing then. But now we would think of it differently because you don't hear that. You know,
Yeah.
it, and as well, channeling Nas as one mic, channeling, talking about his pen, that you talking about a woman that you think is his wife, but it's really his love for rapping. There's a lot there that doesn't get entered into the zeitgeist. And I think it's kind of important that we hold up Black music that doesn't have to make everyone okay and enter it into this space. Because I think we get used to, like, okay, if it's a Black artist, we want them to be above reproach, which kind of talks about our second subject. Because to me, I don't need all artists to be above reproach. When you want artists to be above reproach, you know what you're kind of saying? You think that they're role models.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like, that's why you want an artist to be above reproach versus a soundtrack to a time. So in that, I think we kind of infer we need perfection and not progress from artists, which, I don't think that that's the role I want artists to play. Right. Gil Scott Heron was talked about a lot of, amazing artists. He had his own personal life,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody was like, oh man, don't be like Gil Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, there was a whole bunch of other stuff in your community to think about versus, whatever cautionary tales of Gil Scott Heron's life. It's only now where artists will be like, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to mess with my music, or I have to be perfect to express this art and express communities that are not perfect.
Yeah.
So you end up getting this like strange thing, right? So I just think, like, with the ability to control the zeitgeist in a way and direct it in a very, urban anthropological way about West Coast culture. And then given that, they took some hits, even though it's been 5 years since Nipsey Hussle died, which is crazy.
Yeah.
I think in some ways the West Coast still is reeling from that. Kobe Bryant, 4 and then some change, almost 5. So the idea of like West Coast, unabashed West Coast culture has, in LA culture particularly, but then broader West Coast culture having its kind of origin, having its rebirth, if you will, in this is an important thing to hear, and an important way to me for us to be able to see music separate from the other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, I think you hit it on the head. And I think it's worthy of the acknowledgement. I mean, like the way he's approaching his music and the way they approach music. And there's some others folks that, again, approach music with some level of respect that this is a creative product. It's not just not just content. You know what I'm saying? As weird as that word has become in our time, right? That, like, when I sit back, um, like I have a record over here that I haven't even got to listen to it because I want to sit and listen to it. And like even this record, like I was like, because I knew we were going to talk about it, I was like, I need to find a space where I can put it on and listen to the whole album, right? And take it in. And that's something that, a lot of us used to do, and like was a part of the joy of music, was like somebody's record came out and then you would get it and try to find a time to like sit and really listen to it all the way, and not sort of like, oh, I'm gonna skip through or I'm gonna skim, or I started playing some of it but I ain't really listen, or I went and listened to all the songs that people told me were cool, or you know uh I don't know. I feel like people's orientation to music today is different, in a way that I don't want to be in judgment of it at the moment, but just like I don't like it sometimes. It feels
It's
very
that late stage capitalism, man. Everything is a commodity. Everything is content.
yeah.
And we end up taking it in as content versus taking it as expression
Mm.
versus taking it as a message, right? And just one last thing I want to share, get your take on this. Now the whole Yasin Bey thing, where he talked about Drake was what you would listen to at Target,
Yeah.
and so many SKUs, but like the the thing I think about now is this idea of what is it? How is that music going to serve you when the empire crumbles?
Mhm.
And I think about, and this is any artist because I'm not saying that Kendrick Lamar's music is the balm for late stage capitalism or authoritarianism, right? So I want everybody to, I'm not saying that, but like when you get to a place where music and politics, their connection is one way, and it feels like it's the heyday, and all that kind of crashes, and rampant materialism then now costs a little more, and kind of strange stuff that's over the line, but we just because it's music, we're okay with it. And like, what is the role of music or expression or creativity when the world now finds itself in some sort of broader pan grievance party rulership? Like, does that matter? We could spend probably two shows talking about the role of music in post-industrial Black America, anti-apartheid movement, the development of a variety of cultural movements in Black America, right? But at this moment, is anything that's being shared representative of the state of empire? For those who are inclined, Ezra Klein has a great show right now on authoritarianism. Whatever you take, I'm not. Whether you're happy Trump won, you wanted Biden, that's not really my thing. At some juncture, it's just about international institutions and authoritarianism and grievance, which is an international phenomenon separate from your feelings about it. And just like what serves us. So if people are like, "Ooh, Little Wayne's about to come back and say something because he made a statement about it," or like Drake's going to come back and now he can do another song. Like, do we need that? Like, do we need him to respond?
Yeah.
And to me, the answer is no.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing I would say is like I don't think that to whatever degree is true. I think like the we've sort of moved. We've almost moved artists again, and I want to frame this like out of the like sort of somehow simultaneously in social protests and out of social protests at the same time. I just don't feel like I feel like different songs can be a part of the energy of people who may be involved in social structural, change, whether that's through activism or just through, the the whatever the conceptuality of like being in the movement, what I mean, whatever that was or what that means. Um, and I think we are in a weird gray area of what all of this stuff means. And I think it's a theme that's come up in some of our conversations of like being in these spaces where it's like you feel unless you're very specifically talking about a specific policy item, like within the context of where you live or where you're at, or like city, state, government, or something, and like that's what you're talking about. We we operate in a lot of like, well, yeah, this is generally like a good thing, and then that other stuff is like a bad thing. But it's like that is really clear, and I think artists, I mean, like there's artists, I guess, I'm not gonna like the brother Toby, uh Ngakwe. I'm probably messing up the brother last name, but the
Yeah,
Nigerian brother,
I'm with you.
right? And like his approach to music, it very certainly stands on. It's about him. It's about family. It's about loving your people. It's about a certain type of positivity, right? Um, and he had he's had a couple peaks, and I don't know how far in the overall like pop world that his way he approaches music um has transferred. I don't know, but that would be someone like I could point to in something that we would consider hip hop. Killer Mike and what Killer Mike still does. Even with people having issues with Mike, right? In his complexity. And I'm at the moment I'm not saying motivational, right? Because there's lots of artists that people feel are like motivational, get them hype. I'm talking about that in some
Right.
there's like intentional social consciousness in what they're rapping or making, particularly on the hip hop arc that they're doing. And I don't think there's that many that cross into the upper levels of the mainstream that is their banner. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I think that's just where it's at. And somebody could probably jump in and tell me I'm wrong. And here, look at this artist, and maybe it's somebody I don't listen to, or is this from a genre? And I'm thinking more in the black music space. I'm not going to use the youth. I'm thinking in the black music space, not in music that would be considered related or connected to black folks in the U.S. And I mean, even the criticism of Afro beats has been that it ain't about nothing. Like
Right.
everybody listening to it, but it ain't saying about nothing. You know what I'm saying? Like and that ain't from me. That's from some Afrobeats artists. That's from the I guess Buju and some of the reggae artists. They talk about like this is says supplanted as the world music, and it's just about a bop.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah,
Yeah, which again, I think just I know we move on, but I think that what you just touched on is a really kind of bigger, broader thing. Like, what is the role of music to challenge the parameters, not just to make you think or say what is the most digestible, positive thing in the world, right? Because that always isn't the solution either. Although it is important as a kind of gateway drug, if you will, sometimes into other ideas. And I think we can be clear that not having a balance of that, especially in the like underground, what youth are taking in, right? Because you're going to be like, oh, but look at Pharrell, look at what Kanye West was doing before he took a dark turn, right? But that's different than what Messiah listens to. You know what I mean? He listens to kids with like names like driver's licenses, not driver license, but like driver plates. Like, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
YNK 312.
Right, yeah.
Like,
I see the Didio 445.
yeah, like what they got these names like license plates, man. Like YNX 4562. Like what? And they be like, yeah. That he from Atlanta. He's from this. Like, where did you find his music? Right. So there's again a difference between the mainstream and that. So again, it's as Wesley Snipes so aptly said in New Jack City, this is bigger than Nino Brown. You know what I mean? In Kendrick's project, again, artful, but not, I'm not calling it a Quemini, if that was your saying, or not calling it low end theory. You know what I mean? Like I'm not saying any of that. It's just saying for this time, it feels so different.
Yeah, yeah. So word out. So with that, we will make a transition. So a few weeks ago, we discussed the mayor of a major metropolis and his foibles, challenges, and circumstance, and our intention was to book in that definitely negative situation with some other situations, and I think in light of our now about a month or so away from the election, look, you had brought up you know in this case two, but one of the two uh, mayors and cities, and like what is sort of the the local operations, or thinking about like what does it mean to be a mayor in this coming context, and mayor, at least to me, looking at for a lot of us, our local level elected leadership is especially if we envision challenges from the next administration, um federal administration, is where either protection, direction, but also I think it's always important to remind people like how important the local electeds that in the town, city, county you live in, how much direct impact they actually have on your day to day experience and quality of life. So I wanted to. There was two things. One, we was talking about Ross Baraka in Newark, and Brandon Scott in Baltimore.
Yes, sir.
So, yeah, I think I'll just pass it to you. I mean, whichever beat you wanted to add a thought to start on, and then we can add on from there. Because I thought there was a couple interesting things. Looking at what they're doing at their level of government and then the city, and then even where those cities land and sort of the larger uh, state of being, as it were. Because I mean, Newark doesn't come up as much nationally as it had in the past, but Baltimore still does, I think, come up for certain people. So, yeah, I guess where would you want to enter in on and on about it?
So I want to enter in at a place a guy called me, a friend of mine, political animal of sorts. Um, and we've been like debating the kind of finer points of what happened in the election, kind of post mortem, right? And coming up with a whole host of things that, I mean, one that I just put forth, it wasn't as much of a blowout as we all are saying.
Yeah.
And as the numbers are coming in, I think, but we're still left with this idea of the blowout. So everyone's still left with that first impression when it wasn't a blowout. But we're talking about that. But one of the things that he mentioned to me was at a certain point in the Black community, we were talking about kind of like Black boys and like kind of the migration to some younger Black men to not just Donald Trump per se, but the more MAGA ideation, which I think is you have to be clear about separating, because there's like Donald Trump as a representation of this MAGA ideation. And he made a good point about Black men, which is I think an entree into this dialogue, that prior to a certain time, Black male leadership for a broader set of people had to come through either a religious organization, the Black church, and then increasingly Nation of Islam and other cultural communities, or a civic organization, SNCC, CORE, SELC, Inter, whatever one in your particular community, Black Panther Party, right? Like that's how people developed being leaders. So by the time you heard of somebody, they had been leading something for some time. By the time you heard of Martin King, he had already been a leader. He had already been through his father's church. He had already been to Morehouse. He had already been an alpha, right? By the time you heard of Adam Clayton Powell, he was leading essentially the biggest, most powerful Black church in the country before he became an elected official. So it wasn't like he became an elected official, then became a pastor. He was a pastor that then did that. Then you think about all the elected officials that we then like to talk about. And if you go back, at some point, they were either leaders of a religious organization or involved in a civic organization. At some juncture, those got replaced where you didn't have to lead in a religious or civic or social organization. You just went to the Democratic Party apparatus.
Mm.
So it's not you like now you're like, okay, so what did you do? Well, I ran a nonprofit. I did this, I did that, right? But like, no, but did you run a church? Did you learn how to manage the money? Right? Did you learn how to manage the church's money? Did you actually lead a regional organization? Like, what did you do to establish leadership? And the important thing about this is if you didn't establish the idea of what it means to lead on a grassroots level, how do we understand what that leadership looks like when it's extended?
Mhm.
So thinking about Ras and Mayor Baraka and the article in the New Yorker, which I'm sure you'll put in the notes, about this, like, what they term as reasonable radicalism,
Mhm.
right? Which to me is, how do you take the ideas of wanting to do for your people, especially from a place like Newark, coming out of the 1967 or 60, I think it is, rebellion, right? They don't call it a riot, they call it rebellion. And do all the work he did at Howard, with his group Nia Force, also, his engagement with the Gosners, with our nation. And then going home and then doing organizing, then being a principal, then being a deputy mayor, and then being, a mayor, right? So
Mhm.
I share these things because that's a lot of leadership that you got to think through in a lens of how you want to have the aspirational vision for a community, but at the same time know that people need stuff.
Mhm.
And when do you develop that level of leadership? What's the space in which you kind of get that very practical way of seeing the world that doesn't have things just be so pie in the sky that you're disconnected from real things, which is what some people have accused the broader Democratic elite apparatus of being, right? So that's one. Real quick. Then when it comes to Brandon Scott, thinking about Brandon Scott is the first Baltimore mayor to be elected to 2 terms since like 2003, which on some level is a crazy, crazy idea.
Mhm.
But it speaks to Baltimore's broader sets of challenges in the things where they find themselves. I think O'Malley might have been the last one. I don't think O'Malley served all 2.
Mhm.
I think he might have got elected deal too, both of them. But just like everything that comes with that, and if you think about the Key Bridge,
And
and
yeah.
go ahead.
No, no, I was saying the way he like was thrust on the national stage, like and especially like the crass. I'll just say it, the crass assertions that somehow someone else hitting a bridge was the mayor's fault.
Right, the cost of a company, and I'm not going to pull no MAGA shit on here, but the cost that a company from another place hitting a bridge was like the fault of a mayor who then became a DEI mayor, which should show you the insidious power of that propaganda machine. That's for another day. And they were on the Breakfast Club, and they were, they did the whole, for everyone that knows people from Baltimore, the infamous, Tube and Q, you know, if you had somebody from Baltimore say 2 and Q, you're going to get an interesting variety of 2 and Q and Doug and, all the above. But the idea of a mayor, young mayor, again, showing leadership, showing what does it mean to lead a town with a lot of complexities, but also with a lot of stakeholders, because Baltimore is still Baltimore. Like, as much as we think about it framed in The Wire or their uprising and rebellion, it's still fundamentally a place, Fortune 500 companies, Baltimore Harbor, Under Armour now in the Baltimore Peninsula, beautiful downtown, it's more than what we frame it as. So just been thinking about this context of what leadership looks like on a citywide level. We won't just say a community level, right? And we know that you know a lot about this, but I just wanted to bring that up because I think while we're trying to think about, the Democratic Party is trying to think about all these solutions when maybe the reality of the solutions to getting to populations that you need to win national elections are actually in front of your face.
Yeah, I appreciate that because it's like at some level, and it was one of the key takeaways I took from that profile on Ross on Mayor Baraka. I should give him some
Yeah,
honorific.
no, black folks get real personal.
Get all
So let me tell you something. The dude the other day, met a dude yesterday, and I introduced myself and said met him. I was like, he said, "What's your name, man?" I was like, "Majestic." He was like, "Cool, cool. Can I shorten that?" And I said, "No, no, I can't shorten it. We don't know." I said in a nice way, but we don't know each other long enough for you to be shortening my name, dog. Like
uh,
we want to get real comfortable with people real too fast, but at all parts.
absolutely is him highlighting like his own first run for mayor and like wanting like having stuff on the platform is like, yeah, that ain't even in the purview of the city. Like I like I can't do that. And the idea that like it strikes me about both of them that at some point the importance of governance and the idea of governance, right? And not just in the like, we got to protect the democracy, right? Because to me, that is abstract. But the really like there could be there's a foothold in the world of like, especially if the idea that government is dysfunctional, it's not delivering outcomes, that if you started to build not just, the electoral process, build the electoral process around the discussion of what does governance look like, and then actually as you're governing go, here's how you govern effectively. Like this is what things that should be happening. I think there's an opportunity for resonance there. It's something that even just on a was it middle of the year sometime last year with Mitt Romney was like, yo, we barely passed any laws up here. You know what I'm saying? He like, this is not good for our country that we spend all this time and barely pass anything as a Congress, right? And at the local level, for most of us, the things on a day-to-day basis that most impact our quality of life, the people at a local level at least have the opportunity to impact directly, and so it really matters who your municipal leadership is. It really does matter who's on your school boards, who's on your water board, who's on your county commissions. Depending on cities. There's lots of there's some in some states there's some very wicked preemption activities, so that stuff notwithstanding. And so preemption, just for those that don't know, is when the state government basically does stuff to undermine local municipal laws. And in some parts of the country, it's quite vicious. Like, where a city will go like, all right, well, we'll respect that, maybe this thing is not a thing at the state level, but we want to do this in our city. The voters here want to do this, and then have their state go, yeah, we're not gonna let that city do that thing because we're terrible people. But anyway, I want to stay on the positive. The seeing like once we with Brother Brandon, Mayor Scott really step into that moment where it's like, yo, y'all really up here talking to me about breaking the bridge? Like I did it. Like the mayor is out here with a day-to-day operational support control of the port and what a pilot does. It's ridiculous. And just almost come on, like really going like, man, stop playing with me, right? You know what I'm saying? And I think that there's something important for folks in government, and especially given the context, black folks to sometimes be, to say to the press like, that's ridiculous what you're asking me right now, and make them put that on the record. Make them like they're gonna have to edit around you saying you're asking me a ridiculous thing right now. You're saying something when you go to try to edit this clip and the aggregator pulls it up and whatever particular media algorithm that's going to fuel someone's position or their their discussion points, like you're going to have to edit around me saying why you obviously are not actually don't run anything, do you? Right? You actually are not making decisions around the well being and of people, and I think that there's a place there. I mean, I guess I would say even for me as someone who is an elected person, getting things done and doing things well is at the center of why I wanted to serve my community. And I'm not, and I think that's where people should be, right? Like that the area that you are in governance of, city councilors and mayors and some of these things being obviously much more complex, uh, but especially in our major cities and the cities where a lot of our people live, a lot of our, cities that we all got relationships with, that those folks we see like, yo, that person is actually taking some steps to try to improve on the things that people are concerned about. And maybe that's a place to learn, right, about what can be elevated to a bigger, a broader story around where we want to be. And that's more tangible, right? And it's not to obfuscate things that are still challenging and not going well, and the suffering that people are still experiencing in many parts of the country, which is highlighted and elevated in cities, and is hidden and shadowed in our more rural areas. Which I would love if somebody started talking to the county commissioners that have governance in some of these rural areas of the country where people are suffering and we don't hear their stories, right? Because our media apparatus chooses not to talk about them, except outside of highlighting rural animus at not rural areas, um,
Right.
and that's, to me, that's a disservice to all of us, right? I think and I want to frame that I think it's important, and I'd like folks to look into this work to these what these brothers are doing, and it's not to say that that I have enough to say I agree with every electoral operational decision they've made in their role, and I'm sure there's somebody that'd be like, man, he ain't so and so ain't that person, that brother, somebody got an issue. I'm sure back home with both of them, because that's how that go.
Absolutely.
That's how that go. When you are in government, somebody got an issue with you. But is the question that I think is important is like, are they overall, trying to make good decisions in real time with respect to the things that are under their authority, and I think they are both standout examples of black men operating in the political spectrum, uh, that are, I think making positive waves. You know what I mean? And at a level of government that is more accessible in some ways, but also can be like, if you didn't know about them or didn't know about those cities, you could overlook their work. Like they're not going to show up on the on everybody's docket. But and to Mayor Baraka's efforts of like really jumping into the Kamala's campaign and being a voice in that space. His current run for governor, and looking to maybe bring some of the pragmatism, and how do you say it again? Radical,
Reasonable radicalism.
reasonable radicalism to the discussion of statewide politics in a state that, for those of you that don't know, New Jersey has a very specific style of urban suburban class race divide that is, its own special animal. And,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but there's something too, though. It is a it's an interest. I'm very curious to see how his race goes. If he's successful, if he's able to translate that. Like, yeah, I have some of these views and perspectives. I'm also about that. Like, we need to make sure our state run well and take care of people, all people. right? Sharing power. In that article it talks about engaging with with the Latino community and making sure issues that his community, black community, and Latino community, and others share are not framed like people aren't pushed out the picture, right? And I think that's a thing that I think it needs to be a part of. Like, if we're going to get to, um, if we're going to like, we got to get down to brass tacks and square terms on like what it is we're trying to do collectively. And I think local leaders have to get into that more than like you're kind of like I'm a state rep of this area or even a state senator. You may not need to like get into the weeds of like, yo, how do we make sure, especially around issues like public safety or public health, you got to get into the weeds as like a mayor because there's actual service delivery on the end.
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's nothing quite like local governance
Yeah,
as a person that engaged in as a recovering person from local governance,
I mean,
right? There's nothing quite like it, and however you want to cut it
mm-hmm.
and what it represents. But again, it goes to like a unique thing going kind of back to the election because this is relevant. The number of people who voted for there were a substantive amount of people in Queens and in the Bronx who voted for Trump and AOC.
Mm-hmm.
In Michigan, there were a substantial amount of people that voted for Trump, and then the sister, the state rep, the congresswoman from Michigan, the Arab sister who's a congresswoman. I'm not remember her name right now, but like, which shows you a very interesting set of things that like someone could say, hey, I want Donald Trump, but I also want AOC to be in. So even decisions that people made didn't necessarily mean that it was like, I have gone full MAGA. It meant I made a decision, and that is the decision of the voter. But when people are close to, you know, um, the ground, that's how people know who you are,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I think like, that's important for us to think about. And it's important, Rashida
Mm-hmm.
Tlaib. So just like, which are the oddest two people to vote for ever, to vote for Donald Trump and Rashida Tlaib, right? Like that is like you voted for Superman and Bizarro, right? Like you voted
Right.
you voted for both of them.
Right.
But I think it's one thing you talked about is like, how do you engage with community, and what should the national landscape be taking from people who have to be responsible with the outcomes of people on the ground every day?
Yeah.
And what does it mean in policy and in practice? Because there's one thing to say, here's the policy I care for, but here's what practice looks like on the ground.
Yeah.
And here's what it means to engage in community, right? Folks who, from the work folks do that you've done for a long time around violence interruption, and the investments that both Mayor Baraka and Mayor Scott have made in those kind of things. And uniquely in Newark, they have a men's meeting every month where it kind of engaging men and connecting them to resources,
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging that people are not connected to resources. So when people are not connected to resources, you know what happens? They fall off the voter rolls, like the 55,000 people in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens when you're not engaged. You know what I mean? Like, and so, I just thought it was important for us to talk about it. One, because when we're talking about leadership, we're talking about where's the crucible by which you've been forged in the discussion of serving. And what does it mean when people want to serve without, frankly, having had a space of serving?
Mm-hmm.
When politics becomes a thing that you do because you want a different seat versus a space that you've had to be qualified, frankly, by your community to serve in a broader way. And going forward, to me, for the Black community in particular, there's going to have to be some real, like, what do we care about and who represents us in rooms to define what we care about?
Mm-hmm.
And who has mined the dreams, hopes, aspirations, policies, practices, and procedures and goals of a community, whether that be local, whether that be countywide, be statewide, that be national, to be able to speak to anyone who says, we look to serve your interests and act in that way.
Mm.
And kind of making my loop back to the first thing, when you don't have that leadership space, then your rappers and your singers become your leaders.
Yeah.
You know, I respect everything John Legend does, but that's when John Legend becomes your leader.
Yeah.
That's when rappers become your leaders, because the people who actually represent you, you really don't think of as your leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we elevate those names and those realities in the times ahead, you know?
All right. Yeah, man. So, I don't think it's, I would encourage folks to, I'm going to put the link to those couple pieces in the show notes, but, just look up some of the work they're doing and also cross wherever you at, if there's local leadership that's Black, especially, how are they doing? What's happening, right? In your city? How do you evaluate them? I think it's really important that, there's a level of activity. I think that if folks is, I guess I probably am a broken record on this. If you're dissatisfied with the status quo, but you're not actively engaged in this, in some other status, you're just gonna keep being dissatisfied, and that's, what I'm saying. Like, I ain't saying that you gotta not change it. I'm just telling you in case you want me to, be over there with you. Like, yeah, I'm sad too. Like, I don't know if I'm sad too. I'm just disappointed in the outcome. But I got to get on to the next. What's the next move? Because the game's still playing. You know what I'm saying? Like, the screenplay that screen didn't work. You know what I mean, we're going to come with a different play. You know what I mean? Or we're going to have to, go down to the post, to make the jump between football and basketball at the same time, for no good reason. So with that, I think we did the thing to let it be done. Anything else for the good of the order?
I think the order is good.
All right. So with that, I will say peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, I'm Majestic. Good Brothers is a part of the Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You can support the podcast by rating, subscribing, listening, and sharing wherever you listen. You can also support by searching Justice Rajee on Patreon and becoming a subscriber. And there'll be more things in the future. The shop is still up on Etsy and on AskYourOldhead.com. When you get an opportunity, go by there. But in the meantime, please enjoy and thank you for listening. Peace.